This is Body Talk, where we explore your inner universe. Welcome to this week's episode of Body Talk, and today I am so chuffed to have these two guests on. They're not only awesome people, they're really, really great friends. The first one is the founder of Natural Body's Myofascial Anatomy courses and the lead dissector and designer on the Fascial Net Plastination Project, Gary Carter. And the other guest is the amazing Rachelle Clauson, who is a manual therapist and owner of Flourish Bodywork and a fascial educator and published author. In fact, she contributed a chapter on the Fascial Net Plastination Project to my last book, Fascia Function in Medical Applications. Welcome to the show, my friends.
Hi, welcome.
Hey, good to be here.
It is so great to
Really
finally
good to
have
be
you here. I don't almost know where to start. We haven't seen each other in such a very, very long time. It took doing a podcast to us to actually have a Zoom chat together. Let's talk about the Fascial Plastination Project in fascial anatomy in general. So the plastination is the three-dimensional models of human bodies where you can see all the muscles, the organs, the bones, and the nerves. The most popular one is Bodyworlds, and there are several others that do this too. But as a rule, there hasn't been much representation of fascia or fascial anatomy in these exhibits. And it seems to me that that's been the case in most anatomy texts throughout history.
Indeed. Yeah, it's been an incredible project, first of all, to be a part of. When it first was announced, I quickly called Gary and said, "Do you know about this?" And he said, "I've already signed up. I've already sent in my application." And the journey began. And it just continues to go. And I've learned so much through the process. And one thing I actually didn't exactly realize was what you just said, which is how little fascia is known because we haven't really seen it. And there's reasons for that, but in any of the basic anatomy texts, and I will emphasize basic, which is what most of us have studied, is basic anatomy, unless you have become, an advanced anatomist or you have gotten into the level of surgical text, where you will start to see fascia, because of course it's there and it has to be addressed when you're doing surgeries. So those that have that higher level of education, they certainly are familiar and have seen it, not familiar with all of its function, all of its innovation, all of this new research that has been done recently. But for the majority of the population, and even those that would consider themselves rather knowledgeable about anatomy as trainers, as movers, as manual therapists, haven't maybe seen as much of it because most of the images in text have it removed, so that we can see the much more famous structures that we have been trained in, which would be first and foremost, I would say, the muscle system. But then you get more detailed, you get into the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, and then maybe you'll get deeper into understanding ligament structures and that kind of thing. But to know how they're all connected to each other, it's just not drawn very often, and it's not shown very often.
Yeah, it's almost as if in the Oscars, Fascia is constantly nominated for Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, and never wins in the Anatomy Oscars.
Yeah, that's true.
Excellent.
It's interesting though, because something that we had realized when we were at the Plastinarium in Guben, and drawing influences from the models that were actually there in their internal exhibition that they have. So they have their own sort of Plastinarium Bodyworlds, as it were. And the longer we spent looking at these exhibits, these pieces, started to realize that, I can see a bit of fascia here. Oh, look, there's a piece here, but there's little areas that have been cut and left in place. But basically, the color of it is bleached, so it's a cream color. We call it Guben beige, and there's a big story behind that.
A Pantone color?
Yeah, but the thing with it is that all of a sudden, when you look closely enough, and there was a beautiful plastinated piece of a bear, and when you got close enough to it, you could see some of the silver tones, but they were just the last vestiges of where the tissue had managed to hang on to its own color. So of course we realized that there is some there, but they just weren't leaving lots and lots in place. And we'll get to this later, but now we know why they didn't leave so
Yeah,
much in
we
place.
know.
Yeah.
Okay, and
There's quite a
soon
few
you will
reasons,
too.
technical
Mm.
reasons.
There had
Technical
to be
reasons.
technical reasons. You give me a flashback to a Bodyworlds exhibit that I went to in Cleveland. I like got a bunch of people together and we did a field trip from Pittsburgh. And there was this perfect rendering on this one specimen of from the anatomy trains model of the lower spiral line. They just happened to be there. I don't think they intended for it to be there, but the sling around the lower leg and everything. And I thought, wow, I can't even take a picture of this, but there it is. Getting back to how you started. So Rachelle, you called Gary, and Gary, you did what?
Well, as Rachelle said, I think I had said that, yes, I've already signed up for it. But what happened out of all of that was an ongoing developing relationship of work between Rachelle and I that was sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the morning, because of our time zone changes. And we were in constant contact with each other. It had just gone on. Well, it was all the time, really, and we've kind of developed this depth of friendship that's just gone on forever, really. But then from there on in, yeah, it just became it was a rush, really. I mean, the whole process, the excitement of getting out there, and really, Rachelle knows this. We all travelled down on the train the first night, and we got there in the dark, and we didn't quite know where we're going, and then there's these dark cobbled streets, and they're completely empty, and I think we're expecting to be mugged by plastinate models and stuff. But it was a very exciting process from there on in.
And
Yeah.
there were many more people than just the two of you, weren't there?
Well, the first team was a huge amount of people that came for that first week of exploration, really. I mean, it was a lot of dissection to see whether we could get small pieces and make sure that it worked. And we had people like Jofi, we had Sivan from Israel. Rachelle, help me out on this. There's so many people.
Well, maybe I
We could put a
can
list
set
of
it up a
credits
little
at
bit
the
as far
end.
as the phases of this. I know we'd love to, actually, because it's so true that I've never been a part of such a collaborative project and such a collaborative spirit, and such a cooperative sharing of space and adventure with a group of people of this size in my life. And I think what was the common thread for all of us is that Robert Schleip was the originator of this movement forward of actually finally collaborating with the Plastinarium, even though many others had attempted over the years from the fascia community to see, like, hey, can't we do this as a fascia focused plastinate? And it just was, the timing wasn't right. It wasn't possible. They didn't see the value. For whatever reason, the timing finally came together. And Robert is, Dr. Schleip, is, people who know him know he has such an enthusiasm for fascia and such an enthusiasm for discovering or trying something new. He doesn't, I think he jumps into projects without knowing for sure they're going to go, but he's always willing to try.
Robert once said to me, and I think about it all the time. He's like, David, I have made every mistake possible at least once, and usually out of enthusiasm.
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So anytime I make a mistake, I always think of that and go, be easy on yourself, dude.
Yeah, but his enthusiasm. Sorry, Rachelle. His enthusiasm is so infectious, and to bring a group like this together from that enthusiasm is quite something.
Yeah, and he set it up that way, and I think that's the thing, is that it was so contagious that we were willing to set everything aside and fly to the far-flung corners of Germany in an unknown area to see if we could attempt to do something that might fail miserably, and we were excited about it. And it was because, I think, of the uncertainty of it that we knew we were in new territory, and we knew we were trying something that hadn't been achieved successfully in the past, that we really, really wanted to do it and wanted to try. And the diversity of the group was profound, and the sharing of space and and when I say that, I mean physically the sharing of space. Like there were about 20 of us in that first group, and we had 2 tables, and we were elbow to elbow, arm to arm, like literally leaning on the person next to you as we were doing our fine dissection of whatever specimen we were
Yes, and
working
for
at.
those of you who've
And
never been in the lab,
yeah.
it's always close quarters when you're doing these things. You have to be really, really chummy and kind to each other if you
Something
want to
quite
survive.
remarkable happened as well in that first week, because what I remember noticing is that it kind of self-organized, and
Oh,
everyone started to kind of create the projects and made a list of them. And we started to see people start to take the lead in who would organize that list and how we would organize that and put it together and which pieces were going to be used for what. And it was remarkable to see it all occur. And one of Robert's sayings really is that if we're going to be studying this sort of material, the connective tissues, then we all need to be behaving like a connective tissue. Can we all connect with each other?
yeah. And
And what
Neil
we
Thies
started
would say that it's when you have a certain threshold number of people, like ants in an ant colony or birds in a murmuration, you automatically begin to self-organize. Too
totally, and
few
this
and
is what
nothing
happened.
happens, too many and
Yeah.
you have chaos.
Yeah, and this is what happened, and everyone then started to team up with who they felt they could team up with, and everything worked seamlessly, and that actually, I'm looking at Rachelle here because you guys were on my screen. There was that moment where it started to work seamlessly, and it's been seamless from that moment till today. There's been bumpy rides, but the seamlessness has been the consistent continuity.
And that's phenomenal. And not only is it phenomenal in any kind of exploratory endeavor like this, but you are actually having to innovate and create whole new techniques and approaches while you were self-organizing and learning how to work together as a group. Because this was very different from anything the Bodyworlds people had done, right? Rachelle?
Gary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jump in, girl.
No, the reason I'm looking at him because what we found out was that there were some things that they had done that left enormous amounts of fascia in a particular exhibit that was these like slices of a body taken on. Can you describe it, Gary? Because I'm having trouble, but you know what I'm
Yeah, so
referencing, yes?
about cross
so we've got
sections?
it's a series of cross sections. So at some point we'd had a conversation with Dr. Vladimir Choromensky, and we were considering what might happen as a future piece in part of our planning. And I said, I drew up very briefly an idea of sliced body and cross sections, and Vladimir walked away, and then he came back with his mobile phone with an image on it, and he said, basically in the way that Dr. Choromensky does, in a very sort of flat manner in that moment, he just showed me the screen and said, "We've done it already." And I just stepped back and I thought, first of all, I looked at what we've been doing and thinking, well, what are we doing this for then? And it had been done about 18 years ago or something like that. So it wasn't done in Dr. Choromensky's time, Dr. Vladimir Choromensky's time at the Plastinarium. And he doesn't even know which part of the world it's in. However, it did have
Inventory control, Dr. Cheromensky.
exactly, but it did have elements of muscle tissue in it, and it had elements of bone in it. However, they'd actually attempted something of a similar ilk, but they weren't necessarily going for the fascia per se, but they were trying to show an expanded body, and it was laying on the horizontal, wasn't it? It was suspended on cables, so it was like someone laying next to you, sliced open. With so they'll be about 15 foot tall or something like that. They'll be very long. So things have been done and explored and experimented with before, but never to this extent.
So with such a huge task, humans are bigger on the inside. They really are. How do you figure out where to start?
You start small.
So like a
You
pinky?
start with samples. You
Okay.
start small. Well, and that's really what that first group was all about, because the very original plan was to just jump in with both feet and start doing a full body plastinate layer by layer, kind of modeling somewhat after how Gil Headley's workshops go, where you go skin layer, superficial fascial layer, deep fascial layer, that we wanted to have models, 3 different models that would be in continuous tissue, the whole superficial fascia body, and then the majority of the deep fascia body, and then the core structures body that would go deeper into the viscera and the meninges. But it was way a lot way a lot to take on all at once, and it was thought better to slow everything down, and that initial project timeline was under 1 year, which was not possible really. And so the decision was made to stretch it out to 3 years, and thanks to other pandemics, it's been stretched out to 4 or maybe closer to 5 years, but we're not complaining because we're happy we have more time actually to prepare certain elements before the debut in at the Fascia Research Congress in
Yeah, that's
Montreal
been the
next
hidden
year,
benefit of the
22.
pandemic. I'm involved in a
You
couple
get
of
a little more
projects too, and it's
time.
like, yeah, thank God we
Yeah,
got another year,
absolutely.
man, because whoa.
It's a lot to
So
get done. So that first week that we had that team with that we were describing that was flowing so well, the first thing we did was take on the board, like, what pieces do we need to dissect, not just to see how we will approach dissecting them, but how they will handle the plastination process. So we had specimens specifically exclusive of superficial fascia, specimens that highlighted cross sections of deep fascia, and then one specimen that was visceral fascia. And this was to give us an idea of how to approach the dissection, as well as how the plastination process would affect the tissues, and if any of them needed a different type of treatment or just wasn't possible at all. So that was the start. That's where you start. You start with samples.
Yeah, and it's interesting there because there's quite a number of the group had various fascial dissection experiences in labs without necessarily
Sure.
doing
Yeah.
sort of detailed clinical anatomy type dissections. So because we knew how to go in at that level, we weren't worried about trying to get lots of clinical detail of other structures. All those other structures were being removed. And that was really interesting to see. And very quickly, actually, a lot of the group gelled, and you could see the dexterous skills in a lot of people. And also, it seemed from the outset that people that were selected for this or went through this also were putting together examples of their dexterous skills as examples of whether they had fine art skills, drawing skills, design skills, sculpting skills, and so on. So that came through very quickly because, as Rachelle said, we only had a week. And, as you know, and we've both, all 3 of us have been in labs for a week, and we can reduce a body down to bone really in a week, but it's not necessarily that tidy when you go through it that way because everyone's
no, it
moving
isn't.
at such a speed. And this the constant thing that was happening, and we noticed this ourselves, didn't we, Rachelle, was that we had to keep pulling back and pulling back and pulling back, and it was slowing slightly to get the details. And then I remember personally when I was working on the fascial arter piece with Carla Stecco towards the end, all of a sudden time was running out. And all of a sudden we realized just how much detailed work there was required to clean it up, because I couldn't leave it in a way we could leave something in a regular lab. This had to be so tidy, and all of a sudden it became a bit of a panic for me.
And how did you get through that panic?
I think I just held my breath and just kept going.
Well, it was a bit miraculous that last day. I think things that we really didn't think were going to get finished somehow just did, which was, again, that sort of story that the whole week felt like, which is, at the end of the week, looking at each other going, how did we just do what we just did? Because it had a lot of unforeseen turns, like even just so if we can be more specific, in the cross section of the thigh and of the lower leg, we were trying to remove the muscle tissue from the fascial bags. And in order to do that, you have to first of all know where you're at and what you're looking at, but then to be able to distinguish tissues from each other and to be able to distinguish where one thing ends and the next thing begins. And as much as we would love for that to be just peel it off, they don't, because the body is truly connected. And even things that you would think are more separate end up not being. And then you've pulled something away from something else. So, for example, a piece of muscle fiber that seems to be mostly muscle, but now you've lost the integrity of the fascial wrapping that it was in. And that could be its epimysium, or even the fascia lata itself has so many connections to that muscle tissue that relies on it for its integrity, that things started to fall apart in places that we didn't want them to.
Yeah, that's really
That level of detail blew my mind. It's quite
yeah,
surprising.
yeah.
So
I'm
when
gonna
things
back,
start to fall apart, what happens next?
we keep. Well, I mean, I'm going to back Rachelle up on this as well. I mean, it's we we're really seeing that process happen in front of our eyes, and the full understanding of the integrity of everything to everything else. So it's not just about the fascia being the main thing, is that everything else is so interdependent with it. What was happening on one of the cross sections, of course, yeah, when a little bit too much muscle tissue was coming out, then as Rachelle said, a septa broke apart. And the same as Rachelle just mentioned with the fascia lata, it was weakening and weakening and weakening the more tissue was being removed from it. And that was a real eye-opener. And it was interesting, wasn't it, at the end, Rachelle, when we got to that point where everything was finished and dissected, and then Vladimir had Dr. Shermensky had said that he seemed quite confident, but it seemed like we had a little bit more to learn of that process. So we didn't know what was going to happen next, but then everything was going to go through the plastination process at that point.
And we also just learned the standard that the plastination or the Plastinarium has, right? We had some pieces we're like, it's good enough, right? And he was like, no. Like they won't. And one of the things that Rurik von Hagen has said, that his father, the inventor of plastination, Gunther von Hagen, said, is that for good plastination, you must begin with good dissection. You cannot fix it. Like if the dissection is poor, the plastinate will be poor. So that first step, which is what our team was so miraculously and generously invited to actually do on the full body plastinate, was quite an invitation, because the level and standard required was extremely high, and is why it took a full 6 months, is because we had to go slow.
Yeah, there's something to be said for, we can fix it in post-production.
Not as much. Well, let's put it this way. Even with what seems like a perfect dissection, there still will be post-production cleanup, because there's so many things that happen in the process. And that's what Gary's nodding his head about right now, is because that's where we are at this stage, is that there was a lot that still needed to be done. So if you start with a messy dissection, it's just beyond capacity because of how much else happens during the process.
Yeah. But I think it's great, though, that, that's how you grow and develop, is you throw yourself into a situation that forces you to up your game. And what a fabulous opportunity to be able to improve your own skills and work on such a groundbreaking project at the same time.
And the game is being upped.
Absolutely.
Because we've got someone looking over our shoulder all of the time who has the highest standards, and we need to we're constantly looking into his eyes to get that approval for that standard. And that was hard some days, and it could be also soul destroying some days. So as much as we're talking about the smoothness of the ride, Rachelle will definitely attest to this. We all go through emotional journeys with this whole process, based on getting the best out of this project, doing the best work that we possibly can, but also knowing that we could probably do better each time. And sometimes, some days, those tissues are just not going to play ball with us, and the best thing to do is put your scalpel down, go for a walk. And there's many days that stuff had to happen.
I was just watching a documentary with Steven Spielberg, and he had planned this whole thing in Saving Private Ryan, and they got to where he was going to shoot this particular area, and the sun was in the wrong place. So his entire idea of how he was going to do this, and this was a ramp. This was an existing structure still from World War II that they had gussied up for the film. And he just said, "Okay, everybody, I'm going to go for a walk." And then he went for a walk, and he came back and said, "Okay, here's how we're going to shoot it." He had to completely trash his original idea because it wasn't going to work, and they couldn't stop.
Okay, so this is really quite interesting, because knowing Rachelle, if we were in a situation and the sun was in the wrong place, I would say, well, okay, maybe we'll give it a little bit time for it to move. And Rachelle would be, no, let's move the sun now. Let's find a way to move it. We would actually go about doing it. That's the thing. We would have found a way to remove the sun. The genius of Rachelle is that she would be able to make that happen and rally the troops to get it going. And also,
Yeah.
you know, of course, this is a damn good idea, Rachelle. Okay, I've just got to get up off my ass. Sorry, I'm swearing, and you know, move out there and get that going. You know, and it was brilliant. And she's one of the Rachelle had said I think this is one of the most amazingly creative processes that I have ever been through. And I worked in graphics for years, and you know, what a team to work with, but also to do it shoulder to shoulder with Rachelle has been, I think, the highlight of my life. It's been one of the most amazing experiences.
Well,
Yeah, that's
we're at
amazing.
the
Thank
point
you
in the
very
show where we need to take a break, but Body Talk will come back and we'll find out more about Rochelle's amazing gravity defying powers and ability to alter the heavenly bodies when Body Talk returns. Welcome back to Body Talk with my guests and my friends, Rachelle and Gary. Okay, Rachelle, what's your secret? How do you move the sun?
Well, I've only recently been informed of this superpower that I didn't really realize that I had. Oh, but it makes me laugh so much because what Gary's highlighting is the complement of Rochelle's stubbornness and willpower with Gary's Aikido style go with the flow that works so well for us, and in all the things that we've been doing with this project so far is out of sheer determination. I have pushed things through that should never have seen the light of day. I think just because I had I've had such a vision that Robert cast for us from get-go on the exhibits, you know, of the organization and all this kind of stuff that I just, you know, have pushed maybe harder than I should have on my own self, but with a lot of determination that this project gets the visual exposure that it needs in order to help people the way it would have helped me when I first started studying anatomy and or studying fascia anatomy in particular. But my pleasure working with Gary was always how quickly he could flip the story on a dime, and we would hit a brick wall and he would recognize the futility of continuing through the brick wall and would redesign. And I'm sure he'll get into more, and you should talk more about this element of how you know, as the lead designer, it was an active role, and to this day is still an active role that he has been working with the director of the Plastinarium and the director of Bodyworlds to get this design in place. He's holding up pages right now with sketches all over them. I'd be curious what the number of sketches are. It's hundreds at this point, because one thing wouldn't work, and so he would move on to the next sketch and redraw it. And that's, I think, why you know, I don't know, this role is very few people could fill it the way that Gary has, because of his flexibility and his ingenuity and his creativity and his just willingness to be wrong, you know, and not worry about it and just keep moving. And I admire that. And I'm trying to learn.
As Einstein famously said, if we knew what we were doing, we wouldn't call it research. So Gary, you must have had a moment, two moments where you were like, this is never going to work. We should just pack it up and go home. And what was that moment like? And when did it change? And when did you think, oh my God, we got this. We're going to make this work?
I tell you what, David, there wasn't a moment that ever felt like that. There was the only time, actually, the only time
you that say soul destroying.
Okay, maybe there were 3,000 moments.
Yeah, no, but the soul destroying was that, okay, this tissue is not going to let me do what I want to do. There was this element to it.
Reality so, okay, did not conform to your
have I overextended maybe what the design could be, because it could be a little bit too adventurous right now at this early stage, and so on and so on. However, you know, with all of our varied experiences and such an amazing team when it came to the full body plastinate that we were working on, which is a completely different team to the initial pieces, that I knew also, and Rachelle and I would discuss this endlessly, is that we knew that, and this is crazy, isn't it, Rachelle, is that the right person was out there for the right period of time for the right job. It's amazing how that worked out.
Totally.
But one time when it came to the initial piece, when we were positioning our pieces for the first round, as it were, there was one day that it just wasn't working, because we went back to position those pieces, and we thought we were going to be dissecting. There was nothing of the sort. We were sent into a room that was more like an old car garage. It was dusty, and it had rods of metal and polythene laying everywhere. And I was given by one of the Plastinarium staff a grey box, plastic box, and in it were kitchen knives, old kitchen knives. And he gave me some styrofoam and said, right, make a leg out of that, because you've got to wrap your plastinated piece around that to shape it. And it was a horrible process, because every time I started cutting this blue styrofoam, it broke up and went everywhere and stuck to my piece.
Ugh.
So I spent the first day picking out all the blue bits of styrofoam from my piece with tweezers. And in the lunch break, I sat on my own like a little school child, sulking, because I just thought, I can't do this. I cannot do this. I'm going home. And then I just had to talk to myself and thought, there's got to be a way around this. You know, you've come this far. Let's move it on from there. But something that happened, and I'll just go into this a moment and pass back to Rachelle, is that when it came to these final pieces being positioned and that they were successful in what had happened with their positioning, and Dr. Chomensky was really happy with what had happened. And of course, there was some trimming up that they needed to do. And we hadn't heard much about it for a while. And then Rachelle and I had one of these 2 o'clock in the morning conversations. And it was a conversation about, how are they going to be presented? And Rachelle said, how are they going to be presented?
And you're talking about presented in Berlin at the Fascia
Congress,
in
Berlin,
the
and
first time. Okay.
When I'd spoken to Robert about it, I think he just said, well, they're going to appear on a table. And the two, there was a moment of silence between Rachelle and I, because we knew that the dramatic effect that wouldn't have.
Not to mention everybody wanted to pick them up and play with them.
Rachelle said the magic words, I'm not having these pieces look like a fascia garage sale. And that was it. And we just, both of us went to work on creating an exhibition. Of course, David, you were there and you helped us set that exhibition up.
Oh, it was such a great time.
I thought that was a highlight, and that was, and yet we've gone to another level, because putting that together with Rachelle, that was an incredible experience to put it together. Very stressful as well.
Yes, I recall it being very stressful. That's when we discovered you can buy gin and tonics pre-mixed in cans at the grocery store in Berlin.
Yeah, I think we probably had too much of that.
Yeah, that was lovely. Well, no, we waited a respectable.
How did I miss out on that?
But anyway, guys, this really had me realize how Rachelle and I could work together, and we knew that we were such a good team that anything would be possible. And I know Rachelle and I got a bit of critique for this, but the thing we did was just stepped up to the mark and kept going, and we didn't stop, and we put our life and soul into it equally.
Yeah, it was a world-class exhibition, and it was such a treat to walk into that room when it was nothing, and then suddenly 12 hours or so later, it looked
like,
as my father would say, very professional. And everybody who walked into that exhibit, I mean, the looks on the big wows on their faces made it all worthwhile. And that exhibit has actually been preserved in a way that everybody listening right now can check out, right, Rachelle?
That's right. Thanks to one of our amazing team members, Lori Nemitz, and her gracious husband, Eric. Eric's company is Autocast, and he goes around and takes images of public art and then interviews the artists describing their own art piece. And this is a free app. You can see where there's different installations and exhibits around the world that are in this public art kind of domain. But it was pretty instant for Lori to say, hey, I think this platform would work beautifully for us to use in Berlin, that we could create a virtual tour guide, both with audio and then images of the plastinates with a description that you can either read or listen to in one of the beautiful voices of our team. There's also, credit being given where it is due. And I know that, our Gary and I have, like you said, just really stepped up to the plate, because A, we had the passion, and B, we had the time and the desire to do it. But the team is still everyone. And it's so hard when you have so many people contributing with massive amounts of force and dedication to give everyone the credit that's needed. And so I'm grateful that we have Autocast, where everyone's name is listed, everyone's contribution can be seen in front of you, to recognize that not one soul did this, but many souls. We literally have over 50 people that were directly involved in this project. So yeah, Autocast.
Yeah, and that's OTOcast, and we will have a link to this in the show notes. So big splash in Berlin, and then one of the pieces became part of a permanent exhibit of Bodyworlds, right? Did that happen?
Six pieces, right?
Yes,
three are in Berlin and 3 are in Heidelberg.
You're like freaking famous.
It's amazing. It's a beautiful exhibit. It's kind of mind-blowing. I think when we saw it, our mouths sort of fell open. It's not just stashed in the corner of the exhibit. There's a whole wall in Berlin that has a guy foam rolling, because that's what people know about fascia in Germany. They call them fascia rollers. They don't even call them foam rollers. So it's an immediate link with the public. The passion of Dr. Angelina Wally and Bodyworlds is to bring it to the public, that public education of anatomy. Dr. Von Hagens has this beautiful concept of the democratizing of anatomy, that everyone should have access to understanding their own body. Like, not just doctors have bodies, we all have bodies.
Yes, it's like living in a house.
And for it to be limited.
Can you imagine living in a house and not knowing what a couch is? But that's how we are with our bodies.
Exactly. Never having seen it, never really knowing what it's for, how it works, how to keep it clean.
Something goes wrong with it, or it falls off.
What goes wrong with it? What are you supposed to do? Yeah. And so this like giving the people back the access, probably WebMD was the first thing that really started to bring the medical world into the living rooms of people to research their own symptoms. But beyond symptoms and problems, just to understand the complexity, the organization, the beauty and the diversity that lies beneath the skin. Angelina wants people to understand that. She's amazing. She's a force. She is the force behind Bodyworlds that took Dr. Von Hagen's work and brought it into the public eye. So its focus isn't medical. Its focus is public. The more medical side of that company is Von Hagen's Real Anatomy for Teaching. And they do make a lot of plastinets for medical schools that are very technical. So they have kind of both sides of it going. I'm sorry, what was the question?
And now we have seen in real time the ability of Rachelle to move the sun. We've all heard it.
That is, to me, the glory of what plastination has done. Working with cadavers in a laboratory is a very special experience, and it can be extremely intense. And it lifts some of that and brings the human form back into almost back to life again. I feel like when you see a plastinet, you don't feel like you're looking at a cadaver, even though it is truly, dead tissue. It truly
they're very
is a person
lively.
who
They're
lived.
very lively dead
Very
people.
alive.
And if you're not familiar with Bodyworlds, there'll be a link in the show notes. But these are not stiff cadavers just standing there. They're running, they're leaping, they're doing things that humans do. It's just you can see all of or a lot of the parts and pieces. When I was in Amsterdam, teaching a couple of years ago, there was a freestanding Bodyworlds exhibit there. And it was so cool because I just happened to walk in and it's like, I'm excited because I teach this stuff and I have a book. And they're like, oh, and I gave them a business card, like, oh, you get in free because you're an educator. I'm like, what? Get out of here. And, it was kind of like an exhibit you might see, and I don't mean to demean it in this way, like another attraction at a place like Niagara Falls.
Yeah,
that has all sorts of different gimcrack and fun and funhouse kind of things. But here it is in the middle of all this stuff, 3 floors of maybe 20 feet wide row house kind of thing, showing these full body plastinets and trying to educate the public about their own bodies. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we had the same in London, and I would run talks at the Bodyworlds in London, and David, you were due to come and do one of those after
that's right,
Fascia Symposium. And my father came along to one of these series of lectures that I was doing, and he was a bit concerned about going because he felt a bit squeamish about seeing these bodies. And halfway through he was captivated. He was so fascinated by the whole process because, as Rachelle rightly said, it takes away some of that edge, because there is an element that you're still looking at a model, even though these tissues are, from human form. But the plastic element to it helps it. I think it helps the eye a little bit for the average person out there on the street to come in and be fascinated.
And this leads us to the Holy Grail. What initially was the impetus for this project. So now that you've got like the IT band and the pericardium and these other samples, these proof of concept pieces, the biggie is the full body, right? How's that coming?
I think after the success of what happened in Berlin, actually, it's quite nice to say that, isn't it, Rachelle? The success of what happened in Berlin.
The success of what happens in Berlin.
I think Dr. Cheromensky was very pleasantly surprised with what he saw. I don't think he expected to see what we had produced. And we wanted to do it to respect Bodyworlds, but we kind of created a Fascial Worlds, and the Plastinarium lent us some extra pieces to go alongside the pieces that we had, so there could be comparison. And I think from that success, they saw how serious we were about it, and the full body was something that they were considering. There had been a meeting in Frankfurt with Dr. Schleip, Dr. Chermensky, Dr. Wally, and Rurik von Hagens, and so on, and myself, and we were looking at getting possibly 2 bodies to go with, and Robert tried to go for 3 and got a kick under the table not to do that. But anyway, then the body came up, the full body form came up as an idea, and then we had to select a team, really, or a team got selected by Robert and co. Became a whole journey from there of about, well, I think 15 of us from our FMPP, and then we were counting this up earlier, weren't we? There's about 18 that actually have worked on the body, which includes Dr. Chermensky and our faithful assistant, who I adore completely, Alessandro. He was converted, wasn't he, to the world of fascia by the time.
Gosh,
we were always in the first month, and he was converted.
Yeah.
So he came in as a muscle supremacist,
full-time staff member. Yeah, okay. He's a full-time staff member of the Plastinarium and was dedicated to our team to work with us. And honestly, we thought that we would be overseen, that we were kind of and although I would say, a lot of very skilled dissectors in the team, it was sort of like the amateur team comes in and then the pros would show us to make sure that we did it right. Because obviously we haven't dissected in the Plastinarium before. And I was kind of dumbstruck at like his attitude towards us from the get-go was, I am not your boss. I am here to support you. Anything that you need, you let me know and I'll make it happen.
That's fantastic.
And his servant's heart, like just so completely taken with and taking in everything that we were telling him about fascia, because the process of the Plastinarium to reveal the muscle body and the other bodies of like the nervous system body and all the rest is to remove the fascia. And so genuinely, we had a lot of interest from the other people in the Plastinarium coming by the table to see what the heck we were trying to do, because what they were over at the next table over scraping off, we were carefully preserving as we pulled the muscles out, which was completely backwards to what they were used to, and they couldn't imagine why we were doing that. Yeah. So we got an opportunity to share. Yeah. So he's one of us now. Alessandro's
one of us.
We converted him. This is very good work, Gary.
One of the staff came over, didn't he, to our table, and he said, "Oh, actually, you're actually saving the stuff that we remove, and you're removing the stuff that we save." And it was great, And they
that's because we're from an alternate universe.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly how it felt.
So basically, it said, "Okay, we're ready to do a full body version of this." Did you get to pick from among the subjects, or they just said, here's the one we've pre-selected for you? How did that process work?
So Dr. Angelina Wally had selected her.
Okay.
And it was interesting because I'd been through a whole process of working up some designs based on an original design that Dr. Chermensky had come up with, which was based on a male form and had a quite a masculine look to it, which I've taken him to task on something on this as well, because they've told us that the height of the form can be a bit too high sometimes. And the way that Dr. Chermensky had designed the first one was way above the height that we've put our one in, which was kind of interesting. So I had to catch him on that.
That's true.
Anyway, I sort of redesigned it into more of a dancer's form.
Okay.
And Rachelle has been in my mind a lot with this, because we've based a lot of the design shape around Rachelle as well. And I was chatting to a friend of mine, a colleague of mine who's an osteopath, and he was asking me about the process. And I said, yes, design the body. And he said, hang on, how do you design a body? And I thought, that's a really good question. And really it's about, and these are Rachelle's words, creating vignettes for us to look into, to see areas. And there's a lot there really when it comes to it. So we've included elements from Tom Meyer's work, Jaap van der Bijl's work, Gil Hedley's influences, John Sharkey's influences, Andre Vliming's influences, and many more, including keeping continuity to the conference that we did in Berlin, so that we've kind of blended the two together.
That's fantastic. But this is a process. There's the dissection, which you had how much time to do?
6 months. 6 months.
Over a 6 month period. And then after that, what happens?
The plastinating process is in stages. And the first stage is preserving the tissue. We don't work with fresh tissue for obvious reasons. One, that it won't hold up to 6 months in room temperature. But the other is that they want stiffening of the tissues to give stability to them. So there's some critique of like how soft fix versus, the typical formaldehyde firm fix. A firm fix of the tissue is actually advantageous to the plastinating process so that it can hold up to being dissected and then put back into the bath and then brought back out day after day after day. So a fixed form is the beginning point. Dissection is the next step. And then when dissection is complete, it's a series of baths for the process of preserving the tissue through dehydrating and defatting. And you can't just take a specimen and immediately inject it with silicone plastic. It's not possible. There's the phases of process. And the first is to remove all of the water by replacing it with acetone. And so that's done actually, I think the first process is the defatting because that happens at the higher temperature. So you're literally melting the lipids out of the tissue and acetone is replacing that. And then the dehydration is the water being replaced by the acetone. And then the acetone is able to interact through a vacuum forced impregnation, that the container, the specimen is fully submerged in the acetone and moved from the acetone bath into the polymer bath, and then that's put under pressure, and the acetone literally bubbles to the surface. It actually bubbles out as the silicone comes in on a cellular level, replacing all of the acetone. So what you end up with is preserved tissue that is dry, it won't decay. So positioning is the biggest chunk of time that comes after that.
Okay, so we're looking at 6 months to work on dissecting the body itself to give it the shape and the pieces and all those influences that you want, and then 6 months of preparation time to then begin the process to move it into the final form that eventually people will see. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And how long does that positioning
one little step that happens after that, which is the gas curing, which kind of clamps. It's a process of gas that mixes with the polymer to make it, I like to say, more the texture of like a basketball. The polymer becomes hard at that point, and it's kind of honey-like and a bit gooey up until that point, which makes the tissue supple enough for positioning. But the positioning process, I'll let Gary explain.
Yeah, I mean, it's been wild. I mean, luckily we've managed to find a couple of windows in the COVID period of time. One was in September, where one of our other dissection team members, Jahan Adam, had come with me to work on a body 3. And then I was able to go back in December because I had seen some photographs of our form in a standing position. So she had come out of the acetone and the silicone process.
Yeah.
So she's now in the stage that Joe was talking about, which is the slightly sticky stage, and that will last a long time. I've been worried about that period of time because it feels as if things would start hardening, but they don't.
Is that official? Is that official Plastinarium jargon? The SSS, the slightly sticky stage.
Yeah, sticky phase. Yeah, sticky stage. But so anyway, I needed to get out there because there was elements of position that didn't kind of fit right with the way that the design was originally. So I could go out there on my own with one of their team members to do adjustments to the positioning. And it's quite amazing because she's standing in a frame, and the frame is actually through her body pretty much as well to maintain security to the structure. But for instance, to move an arm, 7 or 8 inches from one place to the next took 3 days.
Wow.
The amount of work it took to make that happen.
It makes me think of like the old stop motion animation.
It's a bit like that, really.
Yeah. That's a good example, probably.
And I had to keep stepping back to keep looking. It's like, oh my God, this is an individual. This is this form that we've spent 6 months working with, hadn't seen for up to a year, is now in a standing position. And you could start to see the Bodyworlds type process coming through. It's funny because, we've been, Rachelle and I, and with all the rest of the team, we've always been, my God, this is actually happening. This is real. This is real. This is real. And then there was that stage again where this is real. This is real. But I've been told now really that the positioning stage can take almost twice as long as the dissection stage.
Yeah, because it has to be
There's a lot
just
to do now.
so.
Well, he's just talking about the gross position, right? The overall posture. We're not even talking about positioning little flaps of fascia to open up and show where, where the muscle is embedded into its epimysial bag or whatever. None of that. We're not even there. This is just getting the person standing, so that it looks like a posture that's an elegant statue.
Absolutely. And now we know why they hadn't hung on to plastinating large sheets of fascia, because so much of it through this process shrinks and stiffens.
There's the big reveal.
Which is what you talked about in the beginning.
Here's the big reveal.
So she will not move. And I'm going to describe it this way. And I know this is kind of tough to hear. We're kind of all used to being in these environments, but to even attempt to move one of the legs, in the moment of attempting to move it, all of a sudden the bone would give before the fascial tissue would give. So in fact, one of the bones would break because the fascial tissue would not allow it. So it was almost as the tolerances had switched. It was quite incredible. So stable.
Wow.
So the collagen
that's a metaphor.
We know how much fascia is formed, like the key ingredients, right? You have cellular material, you have fiber, and you have water with the gags and whatnot. But the water is a big deal. And so replacing the water now has been replaced with plastic. So you start to see how important the water is to the suppleness and the fluidity and the give of fascia. That's gone because now it's plastic in there. And so the shrinking that has happened is because of it's because of loss of water.
I've got a new term, super densification.
We'll get Antonio Stecco to write a paper on it.
Antonio
Super densification. So that's certainly how I feel. But the other thing, as Rachelle said, the fine detail is yet to come, and that's going to be sometime down the line. And of course, the individuals at the Plastinarium don't know to look for those details, because what's happened is some of the tiny flaps have stuck back onto themselves within the stickiness. So it's a bit like exactly. So it's like Saran wrap that's stuck together in olive oil. You've got
they're like secret hidden doors.
Yeah, so we really need to make sure that they're absolutely cautious in the stages that our form is in right now, when they're doing some of the other adaptations that at the moment we can't get out there to make.
Damage them.
So do you remain confident that this piece will be finished in time for the unveiling at the next Fascia Research Congress in 2022?
Yes, we've got the time now. It was going to be 2021, and there was no way that we were going to make the time because of what's happened. But we've got extra time on our hands. We mustn't waste that extra time.
I don't think you will. I do not think you will. Hey, speaking of which, our time is close to up here. So Gary, Rachelle, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. This is as much fun as I thought it would be. Any last words about the project?
My last words are that I've really enjoyed every moment of it, and there's no way that any of this could have been done without Rachelle by my side.
Thanks. It's amazing. Teamwork is amazing. And to that same vein of gratitude, I just want to thank Jahan, Tiaja, Stefan, Gina, Lori, Fauna, Elizabeth, Tracy, Bruce, Adrian, Joel, and Johannes and Beverly. And that is the team that did the dissection.
Absolutely.
And I know that's not everyone that did the first layer, the first round, but you guys made this a magical experience beyond just the being in the dissection room together, sharing wisdom, knowledge, humor, and just the experience of living together. During the time that we were there, we were living in a guest house and working from 7 a.m. until 4 p.m. and then drawing and cooking and everything else afterwards. It's so far exceeded what its original adventure plan was. Even the amounts of friendships that have grown are beyond my understanding at this point. My best friends are in opposite time zones of the other side of the planet, which is sort of frustrating, but it's amazing to know people from all over the world that have such a passion for what they do, and their passion to share this information with their clients and their students. It just warms me when I think about it. And it's been just a real gift.
Yeah, they're an amazing team. I think the creativity of that entire team together has been second to none. It's, as Rachelle said, it's been mind blowing.
All right. And
And
if
to
you
you,
want to get,
David, for supporting this project the way that you have. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
just to thank you, because you were there, you helped us set up with the exhibit, and you've made such an effort to include this project in your most recent publication. And now you're spreading the word on your podcast, and your enthusiasm and support has meant the world to us as well. So thank you.
Thank you, because I got to
That's
be
so
honest.
important to us.
I was having a lot of FOMO about not being there.
I know.
And
there are a
not
lot of
being
people
a
that
part
could
of
have been
this.
that couldn't, you know?
Yeah. Oh no,
Yeah.
it was not in the cards for me when I had my free day in Berlin, and you and Gary are like, hey, we could really use a hand setting up this exhibition. I'm like, yeah, I'm there. You know, it's
Done.
like, yeah, forget about that other stuff. No, this is going to be way more fun. But I really appreciate the way that you have included me in on as much as you could, because you know, you can't do it all. That's why there's great people like you and Gary out there in the world doing, and Jahan and all those other folks, and your names will be in the show notes because Rachelle's going to make sure. But I want to thank
I will make sure.
I want to thank you for being on the pod today. We'll see you next week on Body Talk. Thanks for tuning in, folks. This is David Lasondak. Thank you for listening to Body Talk. If you enjoyed what you heard, please hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to become a sponsor of the show, go to patreon.com/Body Talk Radio. This is David Lasondak saying, remember, it's all connected. See you next week.